Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thanks for joining us for today's event. First in a series, Arts, Pessimism, and the Role of Dance in Times of Crisis. And we'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities, examining research questions happening all across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream both to YouTube and as a Zoom meeting. So if those of you joining us via Zoom, if you have any comments or questions, just pop those into the chat. We'll do our best to get those into a Q&A later on. And those of you here in the space, if you have any comments or questions later on, raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over so that everyone can hear. Okay. With that, it's very much my pleasure to hand the microphone over to Professor and Chair in Contemporary Dance here at Concordia, as well as one of the co-organizers of today's event, Dr. Richard Giersdorf. Jens, welcome in.
Thank you so much. So yeah, my name is Richard Giersdorf. I'm the Chair of Contemporary Dance. Welcome and thank you all for being here. I also want to thank Fourth Space for hosting the first of the conversations in our Arts, Pessimism, and the Role of Dance in Times of Crisis series. We are grateful to our three guests for accepting our invitation, and to the administrative staff, Maud Lerebourg, Katie Scribner, Carl Lebel-Vance, and Violette Marichal, as well as our research assistant, Heather Anderson, for their support, and Maria Masley for making our poster. Special thanks to go to my colleague Lília Mestre for initiating and co-organizing this exchange, and to our colleague Angélique Willkie for joining us today. Finally, thank you to our students who inspire us daily to rethink what dance can do, a question that feels more urgent than ever. Angélique, Lília, and I are uniquely positioned to address this challenge through our histories. Angélique was born into a colonized Jamaica that fought for independence in 1962. Lília grew up in fascist Portugal before the Carnation Revolution in 1974. And I was raised in socialist East Germany before the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. In each of these contexts of coloniality, fascism, and socialism, dance and choreography played meaningful roles within shifting social structures. Today, once again, we face an era marked by the erasure of by the resurgence of fascism, escalating ecological crises, and growing economic disparity. In this climate, the function of art, and especially dance, becomes increasingly complex and urgent. Our histories remind us of what is at stake, yet they are often forgotten or distorted, while systems of power continue to thrive at the expense of the many. Thus, we must ask, what is the role of creative expression, specifically choreographic interventions, and how can these interventions avoid falling into the state of arts pessimism, where the weight of contemporary crises renders creative practices inert and nihilistic? In a world increasingly marked by division, how can the act of physically structuring movement offer new ways of thinking, feeling, and being together as a way of constructing new social models? Randy Martin cautions us that, quote, each proclamation of crises seems to produce a certain amnesia as to all those that have come before, allowing the claim to be fresh and compelling. While this crisis of the world and our place within it has been variously described, an understanding of what analytic means we use to produce that description is much more elusive, unquote. But he continues cautiously confident, quote, it has become difficult to deny that the world's peoples, however separated, now that they face a struggle for survival against repression and abandonment of their collective wealth. Perhaps it will become easier to recognize the shared predicament of their making their disparate identities together by common means. For this last identification with others suggests as well that it is a process of producing not only selves, but society, a matter that lies at the heart of dance, dance that makes itself out of those who gather for it, unquote. We will structure our gathering today in three parts. We will first talk about choreography as an individual and communal modulator, then as an institutional relevance or dance as institution, and then corporeal resistance. These are these three investigations or conversations between our three guests will be preceded by short 10-minute self-placements of our three guests. And it is, to begin this, it is really my pleasure to introduce Susan Leigh Foster, dancer, choreographer, and distinguished professor at the Department of World Arts and Cultures at UCLA in the US. She's not only the founder of the first PhD program in dance studies in the United States, but also one of the initiating and impactful voices of dance studies in the English-speaking world. She's an honorary member of the Laban Center in London and received an honorary doctorate from the Stockholm University. Among others, she is the author of Reading Dancing, Bodies and Subjects in Contemporary American Dance, Choreography and Narrative, Ballet Staging of Story and Desire, Dances that Describes Themselves, The Improvised Choreography of Richard Bull, Choreographing Empathy, Kinesthesia in Performance, Valuing Dance, Commodities and Gifts in Motion, and most recently, Knowing as Moving, Perception, Memory, and Place, which was just published by Duke University Press. She's also the editor of three groundbreaking anthologies, Choreographing History, Corporealities, and Worlding Dance. Susan has been my mentor, colleague, and friend over 3 decades, and it was a pleasure experience her teaching our students yesterday and inspiring another generation of thinking dancers and choreographers. Thank you for being here.
Hello, I will now introduce André, also a friend, and yeah, and I'll read. Essayist, dramaturg, and independent curator based in New York City, full professor in the Department of Performance Studies in New York University, and associate dean, Center for Research and Study, Tisch School of the Arts in New York City. Author of Exhausting Dance, Performance and the Politics of Movement, 2006, published in 13 languages, and of Singularities, Dance in the Age of Performance in 2016. He has been curator of festivals and projects for HKW Berlin, MoMA Warsaw, MoMA PS1, and Hayward Gallery, Haus der Kunst Munich, Sydney Biennale 2016, amongst others. Best Performance Award 2008 from AICA US, and for co-curating and directing the redoing of Alan Karpo's 18 Happenings in 6 parts. Haus der Kunst 2006, Performer 7. In the late 1980s and throughout the 90s, Lepecki worked as dramaturge for choreographers Vera Montero, with whom I also have worked, Francisco Camacho, João Fiadeiro, and Max Stewart, Damage Goods. Since 2008, he collaborates in several of Brazilian artist Eleonora Fabião's actions. In 2024, he curated the online exhibit Soiled, Paul McCarthy's Early Performance Works 1971-76 for Xavier Ufken's gallery. Lepecki's work intricately weaves together critical theory, choreography, and performance to explore how movement politics shape our cultural imagination and how choreography can question and resist dominant power structures. This weaving, which he calls co-imagination, titles his upcoming book, Co-Rio Imaginar, Ensaios com a Dança e a Performance, his first book written in his mother tongue, forthcoming soon through Edições do Saguão, Lisboa. Thank you so much for being here.
My turn. Hello. I'm going to introduce also my friend. In fact, that's what this is. And I actually think that's not small. It's not small. Yeah, we'll get back to that later, but the friendships are important and it speaks volumes. So Erin is first my friend, and second of all, I have the stuff written down. Professor of Fine Arts and Philosophy at Concordia University. So she studies in the interstices of philosophy, aesthetics, and politics, concerned always about alter pedagogical and alter economic practices. She's also the founder of Sense Lab, which has existed for now almost 20 years, which is a globally connected laboratory that explores the intersections between art practice and philosophy through the matrix of the sensing body in movement. Recent books include The Being of Relation, which is forthcoming, Unsettled, also forthcoming, Out of the Clear from 2022, and For a Pragmatics of the Useless from 2020. She works at the intersection of the three ecologies, which no doubt we will come back to. So the environmental, the conceptual, and the social, with an emphasis on the aesthetico-political. And an iteration of 3E, Three Ecologies, is a land-based project north of Montreal, which I will ask her to talk about shortly. And it's really about living and learning. Her artistic practices explore this transversality, and there was a recent exhibition entitled 100 Acres at the Richard Salton Gallery in London. I'm gonna, because I'm the last one to speak and you're gonna do your little 10-minute thing, I'm just gonna read two things actually from Relationscapes, which is from 2012. And I've chosen those because it has a quote unquote direct relationship with movement and dance. But knowing your work, I know that movement and dance percolate through everything. So these are two quotes from Erin's work. So one is, movement is one with the world, not body/world, but body worlding. We move not to populate space, not to extend it or to embody it, but to create it, always more than one. The other one is, quote, the dancer's body provides a glimpse into the ways in which movement creates the potential for unthinking dichotomies that populate our worlds. It's not that movement directly undermines these dialectical concepts. It's that movement allows us to approach them from another perspective, a shifting one. When we are no longer still, the world lives differently. On that note, I'm going to hand you the microphone, and I'm going to, just so that everybody knows, I'm going to have my little clock here, and it's about 10 minutes. I'll let you know when it's about 10 minutes, but you won't have to hear it ring. I promise. So just share where you're at.
Thank you. It's really important what you said, Angélique, about being amongst friends. For some people who are here, you know, I've had a very hard month. And what brought me here was that we could just talk to each other. I know that the question of art is vital in our times. I'm teaching an undergraduate class called Artfulness, 90 gorgeous undergraduates, and they're so full of curiosity about what kind of worlds we can make. So when I started writing about movement, I did it because I realized, and I'm saying this with a bit of, I don't think I realized then, but you know, all these years later, what I'm realizing is that I had been taught in a logic that couldn't abide movement. I was taught philosophy. I was taught about the political subject. I was taught about a white, colonized and colonizing male, still being. The body politic has no movement in it. And it took me time to find a vocabulary for thinking about what had to be excised from our texts in order for us to become docile. And that has led me to where I am today, thinking a lot, always with neurodiversity, thinking with Blackness and all the ways in which Blackness teaches us about the para-ontological, which is to say, away from the ontologies of capture that whiteness carries and insists on. But what I want to talk about today, because we have just a few minutes, is today's a really important day. Many of us in Quebec have been fighting for months, if not lifetimes, to protect our forests. In the spring, the Quebec government put forward a law, Law 97, is the most terrifying law that we've ever seen in Quebec. It would give industry 33% control, control of 33% of the land without any engagement with any Indigenous peoples in Canada. It would also give industry another control over another 33%, leaving only 33% of so-called ecological concern, land with ecological concern in Quebec. About 5 years ago, the 9 Quebec Indigenous nations got together under the rubric of Mamo and Mamu, depending which language. And this coming together was to fight the colonizing tendencies of band councils. We live in really complicated times where the governmental structures infiltrate Indigenous environments too. And when Legault brought forward this law, which was brought down today, the Mamo got together. And over the past 5 months, there have been blockades. And in Montreal, we cannot realize there were blockades. But up at 3E, 3 hours north of here, I can tell you, you don't forget about the blockades. Because if you look at a map of Quebec, you will notice that there are very few roads going north. And if you block those roads, there's no way to get up north. Now, I wanted to talk about these blockades because one might think that a blockade is without movement. But a blockade is full of movement. And so what we did this summer was be part of those blockades, but we weren't part of those blockades perhaps in a way you might imagine. We didn't, Brian and I and other people at 3E didn't sleep in tents at the blockades. We didn't stay there. What we did instead was grow with the hereditary chiefs a certain kind of thought of what else land can be, of what else property can be. Our project at 3E is concerned with this question of land. We talk about it as giving the land back to itself. And when the First Nations hereditary chiefs approached us, it was because they were interested in this. And they were particularly interested in the vision turned toward the non-Indigenous people. They were really interested in projects that aren't trying to carry themselves through quote unquote indigeneity. They have work to do on their own, and they want us who are allochtones to be doing this work too. So what I learned with them is that a blockade is an opportunity to be alive. What we saw over the past 5 months is lots and lots of young people who we know are really struggling in those communities, coming out, living in community, sharing time together. We saw elders teaching practices, medicinal practices, making food together. We saw gorgeous non-Indigenous people taking time, finding money, bringing other people. And this is for me choreography. It's choreography in the sense that perhaps what we all do is engage with the question of what kinds of constraints open up our attunements to the world. And as teachers, we become curious about honing those constraints. What if we did this together? What if this were a passage where movement could express itself? But we learn those attunements in the world. And we need, I think, all the help we can get to be awake to how the world teaches us those attunements. So that's what I'm bringing today.
That's great. Thanks, Erin. I'm going to pass the mic over to Lília for André, I think. Or just straight to André. Okay.
Thank you. So it's my 10 minutes.
Your
right?
10 minutes. I'm timing.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Angélique. Thank you, Jens. Thank you, Lília, for the invitation. It's an honor to be next to the three of you, but also to be next to Susan and to Erin, two scholars whose work I respect deeply, and without which it is impossible to think about movement, politics, philosophy. So things that brings us together here. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to acknowledge also the first peoples of this land. I'd like also to acknowledge the struggle of all of those who have been victims of expulsion and genocide, and that continue to be victims of expulsion and genocide. I ask permission to be here, and I'm thankful for their struggle and for their spirit. What I bring to you is maybe, that's what I thought that I'll bring to you today for these 10 minutes, and then we can expand. I thought that I'll bring a little bit of a summary of a talk that I've been giving over the past maybe 2.5 years in several places, mostly in Portuguese. This talk is delivered mostly in Portuguese, but sometimes in English, and mostly in the so-called Global South. And it's a talk that tries to understand the question. The question of the talk is basically, when is the time of the struggle, right? And what exactly constitutes a time for struggle? And it's a complicated talk that I find a hard time to put it down in writing, because it implies a critique, or actually a radical refusal, of one of the words that actually is here in the title, which is the word time. And what I'd like to also say then, as I preface everything that I'm about to say, is that when Angélique's cell phone hits 10, I guess, it's not necessarily that time will have passed, but actually there's a movement of form that will fall into like a vertical line, a bunch of circles, that will prompt Angélique to say something that then will prompt my movement to stop. So it's like a series of co-movements that we call time. And it's better to understand the question of the struggle in that way. The reason is why the times of crisis, and I'm very happy that Jens brought Randy Martin, because that is from Critical Moves, I believe, 1998. It's a different planet, but it's also the same struggle, right? 1998 is a different planet, but it's the same struggle, right? And Randy is thinking about like what constitutes the time of crisis, right? The time of crisis is the time, is actually the non-time of crisis. The crisis is ongoing, right? The crisis has always already been here, right? We just need to identify what exactly do we want to name the crisis that is already here, that has been here for the past 500 years, right? And there's many names to it, but we can call it necro-racial capitalism, we can call racialized modernity, we can call, Capitalocene, we can call plantation scene, right? But it has been already here. And in thinking about that, there's, I was trying to articulate these thoughts, because if you take away the category of time, what happens is that you must privilege then something else, which is movement. So what happens to a kind of epistemology, but also like a political philosophy that takes away the variable t, or time, and puts in the variable m for movement, and sticks with it literally, right? Full on. The reason I don't write it is because linguistically, right? Like I'm gonna say now, time has passed, and then I caught you, right? Like it's impossible. So I don't want to get into that impossibility. I want to stay actually with the impossible, right? So that's why I don't write it, because it's very easy because our grammar is structured around those formations, right? So there's another grammar in need here, and that maybe that grammar is non-verbal, I don't know. But okay, this is a deviation. But coming back to the question of the time of the struggle. So I was trying to articulate this and trying to figure out like, how is it possible to think about these things when I ran into a sentence by Denise Ferreira da Silva, whom you probably have heard. She's a colleague at NYU. And in a text that she wrote for the Liverpool Biennial in 2016, she writes the following at a certain point, as a kind of ethical imperative for our times. She writes, we must be able to imagine what happens without time. We must be able to imagine what happens without time. And why is it that we must be able to imagine what happens without time? Because what happens without time is what Denise Ferreira da Silva calls in that essay, the racial event, right? And the racial event for Denise Ferreira da Silva comes from this moment in which she wakes up in the morning, she narrates this in this essay, and there's another killing of another Black body, right? I think at the time in the UK, but then which echoes to the Black bodies being killed in Brazil, which echoes to the Black bodies being killed in the United States, which echoes with the Black bodies being killed everywhere, right? So the same news once again, which means that time has not passed, right? But the movement of killing remains present, right? So what does it mean for the movement of killing? The will to kill remains present, right? I feel like this is the moment in which we can start to maybe understand the question of pessimism and nihilism. I feel that pessimism is not nihilism. Nihilism is something else. I feel that the only way for us to understand the rising of fascism, right, is through a kind of radical awareness that fascism is rising because it never disappeared, right? It's always already been here, right? And those who precede us, like Paul Virilio, for instance, in his amazing book called Speed and Politics, it's a very bizarre book that it's about basically the Portuguese Revolution, right? But he, at the end, he has this amazing sentence. He says, fascism is not resurging because it never disappeared. It's always already been here because its capacity for movement is tremendous, right? And the problem with the left, it's the lack of understanding of the fascist capacity for movement, which then puts to the question for the left is like, what is our capacity for movement? Like, what is it? What is the movement that moves our movement, right? And this is where like we get to this aporia, which is, you know, someone who tried to figure it out was Giorgio Agamben in this very short, strange little essay called The Movement, you know, like 2005. And he's having like this talk with Tony Negri. And in that essay, it's like, okay, we're here in this kind of operaist kind of encounter, and everybody on the left like is like, hey, you know, let's think about the movement. We're part of the movement. And then Agamben is like, sorry, but you know, I went to figure out like where this notion of movement comes from and who theorized movement within the political tradition of the West, right? And he says, you know, for my embarrassment and for our embarrassment, I realized that the only one who had theorized the movement, this notion of movement in relationship to politics, was Carl Schmitt, theorizing the function of movement in National Socialism, right? And he says that, Carl Schmitt says the function of the National Socialist Party, the Nazi party in Germany, is to be the guarantors and the propellers of movement. Okay. So this is really incredible, right? So what is our movement then? How is it that our movement could occupy this idea of movement? And this is where I feel like pessimism and, right? Take my movement? Should I move? No, no, but I don't want, I'll finish. So this is to be continued. It's a question.
Hi, everyone. Jens, Lília, Angélique, thank you so much for inviting me. It's so great to be in Canada. Thank you for letting me into your country. I come from the unceded lands of the Tongva people, AKA Hollywood. I acknowledge the Indigenous presence here and am very grateful to be able to visit. I think What I would like to say is that I'm very pessimistic about what's going on in the world, certainly in the US, but just more generally, there's just so many problems. But I am not at all pessimistic about dance. I think dance is needed more urgently than ever, and it has more that it can do than ever. And so for those of you who follow dance, make dance, dance, it's a great time for dance. Dance offers so many things to the world. It offers the analytic lens of looking at the world through movement. It offers the proprioceptive awareness of what our bodies feel like and how we sense all day long, and how we create that connection with our surroundings. It offers this opportunity to create. And that can take place in so many different ways, but it's often something we do together, which I think is pretty great. And it's also something that offers new visions of what the world could be, as well as analyses of how the world is now, what's wrong with it, what's right with it, what could be improved, and it offers the opportunity to make fun of the world and to to laugh together, and it does all of this through the deep connections that our mindful bodies make to one another as we move together. So dance is there for us. I just got an invitation to review a high school student's submission to a high school journal, and this student wanted me to review it, and the paper, I haven't read it yet, is all about AI choreography and the possibilities for AI taking over the dance world. And I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that that's something that dance offers as well. That it is deeply and uniquely human.
Thank you so much for your little talks. So I'm going to orient these first 20 minutes. I have questions for the three of you, one for each, but we can see where we get. So like, if you feel free to intervene if you want. So I start by introducing myself. So my name is Lília Mestre, pronouns she, her. I am a Portuguese performing artist, dramaturg, researcher, and pedagogue working primarily in contemporary dance and choreography. My strong focus is on collaboration and process-based practice. I am currently based in Georgia, Montreal, Montreal, where I've been living and working since November 22, so not so long ago. I also thank you for welcoming me. And I'm working in the Department of Contemporary Dance, where I am a professor, and I'm a co-director of Lepecki, which is a cluster for research in the performing arts, part of the Milieu Institute. So my work engages with scores, intersubjective setups, and chance-based methodologies, not just as creative tools, but as pedagogical and political instruments. I'm particularly interested in how artistic practice can generate alternative forms of study and organization, opening space for social and political reflection. So it's like I try to see teaching and the classroom as also a setup for improvisation, like a place where we actually working together and producing meaning as we go. So my first question has to do with this, and it's directed to you, André. And I'm going to read a short excerpt of a text you wrote in 2013. It's an essay titled Choreopolice and Choreopolitics. And so it will be the trigger for you to speak. Yeah. So quotes, the adjectival political, defined as the movement of freedom, is a difficult, ever-evolving commitment. It is less predicated on a subject than on a movement, Bewegung, defined by intersubjective action that moreover must be learned, rehearsed, nurtured, and above all, experimented with, practiced and experienced, again and again, and again and again, and in every repetition, through every repetition renewed. And what is the practice that needs to be practiced in order to ensure that the political does not vanish from the world? Precisely that thing called freedom. The vanishing of the political thing from the world is the vanishing of the experience and practice of movement as freedom. Yeah, I think this is very pertinent right now. Like, and so how we keep the political, like how we keep it in movements, right? And being it an intersubjective force. Yeah, so I'm quite interested in how can dance interact with structures of power, both in an individual and in a collective manner.
Thank you, Lília. Thanks for bringing that quote. It's from the Choreopolice text, which was written first in Portuguese in 2012, and then that version is from 2013 that was published in TDR. It's a slightly, well, it's actually quite different, but both coming out of 2011, right? Which is Occupy Wall Street, again, mobilization going on after the financial crash of 2008. And I feel like it's very interesting to think back to that moment, 2013, 2012, 2011, because this is like the seed for what's happening today, I think, right? It was a fuel of insurgents, but it's both from the left, let's say, but also it was the seed for insurgents from the extreme right. That's also where the Tea Party emerges, and in Brazil, a kind of counter movement that starts as a kind of insurrection that soon becomes an insurrection of the right, right? So it's interesting to think about this question of practicing freedom, because the word freedom is being used tremendously by the extreme right, right? They're freeing themselves from, you know, whatever they feel has been oppressing them forever. So it's a complicated word, and I think like if I had to write that letter again today, I would do it in a different way. But just to frame it, it emerges also because that version of the essay is directly related to Hannah Arendt, right? And Arendt is the one who says, you know, what is the meaning or what is the orientation, what is the sense of politics? The sense, the orientation, the meaning of politics is freedom. And I have the impression that those who have experienced extreme oppression know exactly what kind of freedom we're talking about, right? And in that sense, like I'll just add something, going back to what I was saying before, to be continued, that perhaps the question of institution that you're talking about, like, right, like your question, like, you know, how is it that then we can think choreographically and choreopolitically with the relations between dance and institution? Was that the question? Or collectivity? collectivity. Intersubject collectivity. Yes. Okay. So, all right. So going back to that essay that was never written. So I'm trying to deal with that stuff. And in 2023, in February, the Yanomami shaman leader, Davi Kopenawa, went to New York and gave 2 talks, one at Columbia University, one at the Shed, very different contexts, right? And in both occasions, the talk was called The Yanomami Struggle. The Yanomami is a people from the north part of the Amazon, of the Brazilian Amazon, with a little bit entering to Colombia, Venezuela, but mostly in Brazil. The Yanomami Struggle. He started his talk in Yanomami, then spoke mostly in Portuguese, finished in Yanomami. It was about like the genocide that's going there, all of this, asking for solidarity, presenting artists, and also thinking about how exactly like the function of art, right, in the struggle. And then to think about intersubjectivity, and this is where I find the question of friendship and solidarity and being together is very, very interesting and destroys the notion of time. At the end of his talk, the last words that he said were back to Portuguese. And it was very simply something that some of you may know, even if you don't speak Portuguese. A luta continua. Do you know this expression? Have you heard this? Okay, some of you have. The struggle continues. A luta continua. And that gave me the chills because a Yanomami leader, right? He's already like in his late 60s, early 70s, right? Saying a luta continua, it's short circuits because that expression, do you know where it comes from? Right? The Portuguese Revolution? No. It comes from Eduardo Mondlane, who was the leader of the Frelimo, the Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, who coined the expression in 1962. So it was an anti-colonial expression, a luta continua, which is now used in all demonstrations from the left, a luta continua. And in Portugal, everybody thinks it's from the Revolution of Carnations. It's not. It's from anti-colonial guerrilla in Mozambique in 1962. And in 2023, it's in the mouth of the Yanomami leader. This movement of the struggle, which is also the movement of language, which is also an intersubjective movement, right? Talks, to me, reveals a little bit like this choreo-political movement because it's transtemporal, it's transgeographic, right? And I'll just say that for now. Yeah. Is that okay?
I'm okay with that. Yeah, I would like to ask Susan a question. And it goes into the matter of intersubjectivity, but more concretely into choreographic practices and examples. I read the article. I need to read the title. Choreographing connectedness, Aiko Otake, Wen Hui, and Phaedra Scholes, and the way you actually speak about the theater as a gathering place, so a place that motivates community. And then you also speak in detail like on how the two choreographies structure support and connection in very different ways, but which does something to the audience, right? Like we go out of the theater with something. So if you would like to develop or to discuss a little bit like the tactics, choreographic tactics in a way into motivating connection and intersubjective also as audience. I mean, because I was touched by that. Indeed, we sit in a room and we might not speak with anyone around, but we are together somewhere. We gather for something and we receive something then, right? And we all somehow shared a moment that lives with us. Yeah. So that, yeah.
First, let me say one other thing that dance does that I forgot to mention before, because Randy Martin makes this terrific argument about how dance has the potential to create political mobilization. It gives the kind of kinesthetic, the physical basis and commitment for that. And that's a pretty powerful role and responsibility for dance as well. I have been thinking, I mean, but this gathering is also worth examining as similar to what takes place in the theater. You don't all know each other, I don't think. And you've come here because you share certain values or have some curiosity about what might go on here today. You're sitting next to each other, you're feeling each other breathing, you're hearing each other, you're smelling each other. Some of you are touching each other. You're aware that you're all facing a certain direction, although some of you are actually, you know, facing a little different direction. And then we're around on this side kind of completing this circle of what's happening in this room. And going to see dance in the theater, it is about that, enhanced by the fact that, you know, people are moving in front of you and you're therefore brought into an even greater awareness of your own physicality and your connectedness to those who are nearby. The pieces that I'm talking about in that essay are building trust across difference. They're building the possibility of sharing together. And they're doing it in completely different ways, just utterly contrasting ways. Eko Otaki and Wen Hui come from Japan and China, and they're trying to share memories about World War II with each other through what they remember their parents or grandparents said to them about the war. And you know, Japan invaded China and sexually enslaved thousands of women as part of World War II. And they're struggling both to understand that and to understand the possibility for how they could move beyond the antagonism that they inherited as citizens of their countries, and to support one another physically and emotionally, and to embody these and retain through the telling of them these stories about the war, and therefore to give the stories ongoing life through the sharing of them with the audience. Driscoll's piece takes 10 dancers who are completely unalike, physically, in terms of their skin color, in terms of the clothing that they're wearing, in terms of their gender orientation, and puts them on a rotating platform that's about 12 feet by 12 feet and increases the speed over time to the point where they are literally flying off from the centripetal force of it and then running to get back on to the platform and trying to care for each other in that way. So they both present portraits of how you could possibly build connection in times of urgency and pessimism. And that's what I wanted to write about, because I feel we are living in this era of enormous fragmentation and isolation from one another. You know, most of the time, it's better here in Montreal. I mean, I'm so tired of everybody walking down the street like this. So not paying attention to each other at all. So that's why I wanted to talk about the potential for the theater to bring people into connection. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's very nice because it's very concrete in the content, but also in the form that those two pieces take, and the way also they dispose of the audience, right? Like namely in weathering, we are around, yeah. So we are also holding whatever is happening in the center, and you're very engaged in yeah, as an audience member, I find. Yeah, thank you for writing that. And Erin, I would like to go to the land because I think it's another. So again, intersubjective. I think it's the word in a way. So you cannot do it alone. And then I think it's when it also becomes political, right? Because it's also with a confrontation, with the difference, with the trouble that it comes to be in being together. Being together is not just nice, right? It's also difficult. So yeah, because of all that you have said already about the three ecologies and the blockades, and also the sensitivity to the land and the indigenous peoples. I was just this weekend in a workshop organized by a student, which is here, Adalia, and where Adalia brought several indigenous people together to actually kind of teach or inform teachers how to actually speak about indigenous practices and also the history of dance in indigenous peoples. And when we were practicing powwow, the person was constantly saying, this is not learning. This is not about learning. It's about remembering. And this was a very interesting idea to me, like on how actually we know it. We have it in our bodies. It has been passed to us, no? Yeah. So this idea and this idea of also like going to the land to practice as well, if you could speak a little bit about this.
Thank you, Lília. Well, Brian Musumi, who's back there, and I started the Three Ecologies project about 5 years ago. And it's always been very important to us to say that it's not a back to the land project. The three ecologies, the social, the conceptual, and the environmental, are always in act. Susan, your comment about how we walk the streets, or the way you moved us from Brazil to the Yanomami to Portugal. My God, we were traveling when you were speaking. What we found, though, Brian and I and many others, was that when we were in Montreal, where Sense Lab was located for a long time, not just in Montreal, it was in all kinds of other places too, the environmental ecology tended to be backgrounded. That's not Montreal's fault. It's just that in Montreal, the other two ecologies tended to take a certain kind of space. It makes sense, you know? And we found ourselves more and more concerned as time went on with perhaps two major things. One of them is the question of learning, and the other one is the question of living. The university is extremely good at one thing, and that is gathering amazing people. And it's pretty bad at everything else. And what it's really bad at is allowing for other ways of learning. And it's painful to be part of the violence of how we constantly think we know what it means to know. And how as teachers of that knowing, we become, the police. And so 3E for us on the one hand was about saying we're learning, we're just learning. Not about it's bad to learn in the university, but to say where else and how else and with what else can we learn, including because I'm learning right now, right? So that was the one thing. And the other thing was, in this moment, Brian and I had often over the years been in environments where it seemed to us that people who we really, really respected and who were really important to us were asking people of a younger generation to do the hard work. And it seemed to us obscene because people of our generation have the conditions to do it. We own property, or if we don't own it, we have access to owning it. We own so-called knowledge. We have time. We all pretend we don't have time, but it's not true. We have lots of time. to do really important things. And so Brian and I had been traveling a lot, doing a lot of talks and exhibitions and performances. And we thought, well, maybe it's time to stop that for a while and just do something here. So 3E started there, but I wanted to say that it's not a Back to the Land project, because that would suggest that the work was elsewhere, but it's not elsewhere, it's right here. But when we are up north, off grid, 3 hours north of Montreal, you can't ignore the ecology, the ecological, the third ecology, the environment. So as you were both talking, I was thinking, and to come back to this, I was thinking of two things that I would say. And they're both quotes, because we've been quoting people today. One of them is Saidiya Hartman, a part sentence that I go back to over and over again, which is the burdened individuality of freedom. So Saidiya Hartman writes this amazing book called Scenes of Subjection, and she talks about the afterlives of slavery and says, what emancipation promises is the burdened individuality of freedom. Be careful, right? And then the other one, who's already been with us here today, Denise Ferreira da Silva, who reads Edouard Glissant and says that what we need is difference without separability, right? Difference without separability, the hardest thing in the world. We don't like difference without separability. We want to have things in common. And with that, I wanted to just give an image. It's because I know we're going to grow with this. So I'm just kind of throwing things out, you know? So Brian and I drove to La Tuque in June upon being sort of called on for this work against the law 97. It felt like a really extraordinary moment in my life. And I know it was for Brian too. In my life, it's felt like a challenge to know how to be in conversation with indigeneity without rehearsing colonial structures. And we had been, I had just finished a book called Unsettled, which is, amongst other things, looking at a book, not a book, a pamphlet that was published in Quebec. Around, there were, I think, 11 of them that were published between 1880 and 1930, called Guide du Colon, Colonizer's Guide. The top of the one in our region says, Emparons-nous des terres, let's grab the land. So these were the booklets, the pamphlets that were sent to Belgium, to France, and to Switzerland to get the colonizers to come. The colonizers were then given $60 and 100 acres. If you know Quebec history, you know that the land is all long and thin. There's a, you know, all of us who went to school here know, because there's a whole politics to how land was distributed by the church. I can tell you more about it if you want, but. And so as a colonizer, the pamphlets describe who the colonizer is, and it's not everybody, you know, you have to meet certain criteria. You're going to be assisted by the priest, who is going to help you have the children you need to have. You have to have built a building within 5 years. You have to have taken down a certain amount of the forest. And each of the pamphlets says there is nobody on this land. Right? So I just finished this book and I was desperately trying to figure out whose unceded lands we were on at 3E. And there was no information. I called everywhere. It was a wall. And then Brian and I were contacted and we went to La Tuque, and suddenly all the walls went up. Within a week, somebody had called me to tell me whose unceded lands they were, and a whole nother circuit. This is how movement works. Right? So the Yanomami who says, you know, the struggle continues, it's a movement that opens that up, right? And so Brian and I go to La Tuque, and there are very few Allochtones there. And it's important I'm saying Allochtone because never in all our conversations this summer do I hear white. Autochtone et Allochtone. They don't want to play the binary of colonialism. And the other important thing perhaps to know is that the Atikamekw, 97% of them speak Atikamekw. So you're not entering into Atikamekw environments with, you know, with a feeling of supremacy. Most of the time you don't understand what's happening as an Allochtone. And it's important, I think, to underline that. People are living in their communities. But what I really want to say is this. So both Susan and André talk about difference without separability, how we do this, how we come together without being the same. and how we rub up against that, and how the question of struggle means different things for different people because it's always in movement. So Dave Pedagogy, who's the sort of self-designed or self-designated or group-designated leader, it would be false to speak of a leader in a traditional way, says that given the blockades, the hereditary chiefs are very aware that Quebec is not shutting them down because they're afraid of the media. So the hereditary chiefs through these many months have been safe insofar as they haven't been arrested. Dave says, well, we've got to get a constitutional lawyer, and he makes the case. And then a woman, an elder, an Inuit elder, whose name I don't know, speaks for maybe 20 minutes about how wrong he is. And she just speaks calmly about how they've never believed in the Constitution. They never had the Constitution. Why are we concerned about the Quebec Constitution? And there's silence. And then a person who I believe is Innu, but I'm not sure, speaks. And there's a third way of speaking about this. And there is no moment of resolve. This happens in the space. And the constitutional lawyer gets contacted, but the dissensus is allowed to stay there. And I think that's what movement can do, is allow for that complexity. It's hard because I'm trained, and so many of us are trained to want to paper over it. We want to know that, or at least I often want to know that we're going to be okay. But my feeling in that room was that they knew they were going to be okay. And they've been in crisis for hundreds and hundreds of years. The forest didn't start being cut down 6 months ago, right? And so they're in it for the long game. And they know that in the long game, there are going to be many ways of approaching it. And so what they are practiced at is that choreography.
Thank you. Jens?
Thank you. You already touched on several things that we wanted to bring up in the second part of our conversation about institutionalization. I wanted to start differently, but I would rather go off something that you started to talk about when you mentioned fascist movement. Yeah. So, and I think it is worth understanding that movement does not come from nowhere, that it is already there. Yeah. So, and that there's a possibility of going either way. Yeah. So that there is a choreographic pattern already, that there's a making already, and that it depends what you do with the movement and how you are structuring it. Yeah. So that even that fascist movement has in itself the possibility of becoming something else. Yeah. So, and I think that is an important aspect when we think about corporeal institutions and their role of like making movement into something else. And I'm wondering if we could be maybe talking about that a little bit. Yeah. So I, of course, have been interested in institutionalization around epistemologies in our field and have compared them in different national contexts in order to understand not only how are different national contexts utilizing dance, but also how dance is then structured by those contexts differently. Yeah, so how are our educational institutions structuring it differently in relation to national understandings of it? Yeah. So the question that I wanted to ask now is actually, what are the corporeal institutions that might be of value today? Yeah. So you creating a radical alternative to the university structure. Yeah, with 3 ecologies. You having talked about, and in your latest book, you say like dance sits uncomfortably within the university, sometimes conceptualized as a way of merely to relax or express feelings, as an antidote to more rigorous academic study, and other times as a unique form of investigation and problem solving. Yeah. So, and you also talked then about the possibility of movement and at the lunch counters. Yeah. So my question is, and maybe I start with you, Susan, like what are some of the corporeal institutions that are still of value, or how can we make corporeal institutions valuable again?
I have a problem with corporeal institutions.
Great.
I don't know what they are, because it feels to me like every institution is constructed by, inhabited by, moved through by bodies, people. And so every institution is composed of physical movement.
So what are the implications of us working in relation to them? Yes.
Us as people who are interested in dance.
Yeah.
Right. I think another thing that's really great about what dance does is it offers this opportunity to reflect on what we're doing, or once we've done it, to look back at it and say, what did we do? And over what period of time, and how did things change? And what were the decisions that we made that, created that change? And dance offers that opportunity in a very powerful way that's different from talking about an article that you read, because it's something you did, and it's probably something you did together. And so yesterday, when we got to see these fabulous studies that Jens's students had done, and everybody got to talk about them afterwards, and to observe things about them. That's something that dance does really well. I don't think that dance should be limited to universities by any means. I would love to see all healthcare providers teaching dance composition courses. And I would love to see community centers, every community center offering a course in dance composition, how to make a dance. What a great idea. Tell me something else to say.
Can I extrude something, like keep the line? I don't know, it's a bad word, but can I just continue yeah? I agree with Susan. I don't understand corporeal institutions, because sometimes people say I work with the body, and I keep thinking how police is very, very attuned in how to work with the body. Not only their own bodies are cops, but also the bodies of those that they carry right now. ICE, for instance, right? Torturers know of the body. So there's lots of body knowledge everywhere, and every institution is corporeal, right? So then is the question, like, how do we do with the knowledge of my body? It's like, so that's the question of politics and ethics. And I was thinking also, like, how, Jens, I don't know if I'm being too gentle. I actually disagree that fascist movement can turn into something else. I think fascist movement can only continue to be fascist movement. I really believe so. The way it's like, it can turn into something, it can remain fascist, but it can turn into something else in its mode of expression. And what I find super interesting is to think about the difference between fascist movement in 1930s, when Leni Riefenstahl's movies, that kind of stuff, right? And to think about the Trump little dances. The Trump little dances are a kinesthetic phenomenon to be investigated profoundly, because they become viral. And in Portugal, there's a super right-wing fascist party called Enough. And the Enough party now became the second biggest party in the country, in Portugal, I tell you. And when Trump got elected, there was this Instagram video in which all the Portuguese Chega deputies were like, Congress people were doing the little Trump dance, right? So fascist dance and fascist movement transforms from within, but they remain fascist, right? Because fascism, and this is the difference between pessimism and nihilism, is that Fascist is nihilistic in the sense that it's both genocidal and suicidal, right? It takes the line of killing all the way to its final solution, which is first the genocide of those they identify as the enemy, and finally their own death, right? It doesn't matter. So to bring everything down, it's kind of, Deleuze talks about this kind of black hole, right? In which like nothing escapes that logic of movement. So I wanted to say that, but I also want to be not optimistic, not hopeful, but in the spirit of the struggle to continue something that Susan said, which is the kind of affective joy that dancing, even if it's very hard dancing, even if you don't know how to dance, can bring to a collective. I don't know how to dance, so I participate of that kind of hesitant joy, but I try to be there, right? So that is very, 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 very interesting to think about. What is the politics of affect that dance can bring to those bodies in the room, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, the dance is not always positive in that way. I mean, as Saidiya Hartman, acknowledges, slaves were made to dance on the auction block. And so dance can take place in some pretty horrendous situations with pretty horrendous consequences. But insofar as dance is in the university, I think it poses this fantastic problem about how knowledge is colonial and colonizing, and about how the example of dance as a practice that is built on acquiring different kinds of knowledges and having different kinds of knowing in oneself is valid and valuable. And it's like a little burr in the university's side. Well, God, there's that dance program. They can't quite, they can't quite like it, but they can't get rid of it. And let's also just remind ourselves that when we make dances, we work hard and we laugh and we struggle and we forgive each other's faults, and we invest enormously, and we do it all for no money.
Can I add something? Yeah. When I started writing about movement, the main reason I did it was that I ended up a prof here, and I ended up with all these PhD students who were dancers, who wanted to do PhDs on movement. And in those years, there was very little to go with. José Gil had written his amazing work on movement. There were the philosophers who'd written about movement, but there was very little literature that wanted to think the difference between movement and displacement. And I remember, as Susan is saying right now, I remember thinking as a dancer, I spent, probably years in studios, and you don't actually use language very often to find movement. You find your movement through movement. It's the same thing with riding a bike. You don't have long conversations about how to ride a bike. You get on a bike and you bike. And I remember as I started to write about the difference between movement and displacement and thinking about the making of space through movement, realizing that there was a great violence there. Almost everybody I knew, because most of my life, most of my friends have been dancers, not academics, they didn't think they were smart. I think this is really common, because if you're not mobilizing your intelligence through language, you think perhaps there's something lacking. So I think what you're saying is really important, and it's really vital in these times, because language is a devious force, really interesting, really profound. I'm also a philosopher. Obviously, I love language. But I think that one of the real struggles I have institutionally is that we've not given language its due, because language is also a material. And if we allow language to do the materiality of its moving, something else begins to happen that isn't purely explicatory. And that's, I think, what dance teaches us to do.
I just wanted to say that that is really important. I feel like this, what is it that dance or the knowledge that comes from dancing and to moving, even if you're a bad dancer like me, offers to the possibility of moving language differently, right? So that you're not constantly replicating cliches and things like that. I think it's super important. And the more I teach undergrads and the more I see like the way high schools in the United States, I don't know, or at least like in New York State or something, is formatting. It's horrific, right? Formatting thought, formatting like effectiveness of use of language, like it's and this malleability that dance maybe can offer to philosophy, to language. I think is important. I just wanted to say that.
I'll just add one thing. The other thing I was thinking about. So I know I'm going to be hard on the university. I always am. I don't come in wanting to do it. But I mean, I teach a class at 9 o'clock in the De Sèvres cinema over here. And I'm supposed to keep the students for 4 hours. I never do. But they're supposed to learn while they're sitting down in an auditorium. Like, who can do that? I can't do it. Even what we've done with primary schools. Exactly. I mean, it's a weird, weird thing. The other thing I want to say is that I was certainly taught, I mean, I started dancing really, really young, that to be a good mover is to be an exuberant mover, right? And one of the things that I've noticed in the forest these last 5 years, and I wasn't like, I grew up on a farm. It's not like I didn't know what land was. I hated it growing up. That's another story. But is that the rhythms that I was taught as a dancer are not good for the forest, right? And they're too fast, you know, they're too self-centering. And so there's something that I am always learning there about being in the environment. And I think also, so what we can do, to go back to Jens's question about thinking the institution, the gift I think we can make collectively, and I don't just mean professors, I mean all of us, is to say, you know, how are these walls constraining our thought? Or how is this choreography of sitting and listening hampering our ability to be in the movement together? Or where else was the movement happening? Or how was it that we biked here and we didn't start off by talking about like how we biked fast so we wouldn't get caught in the rain? Or why is it that we have these conversations and don't start there? Because we don't tend to start there, I think.
Okay, just a minute. Okay, so a little note on me. So my name is Angélique Willkie, and I identify as a non-white immigrant settler on this land, Dojage Munyang. I'm originally from Jamaica, where my origins are unidentifiable. So that is extremely important. Yeah, it means that my way of engaging in the world is from a place of unanchored hybridity. And I have had to make that into a situated thing. So that influences, I think, who I am as an artist, as a thinker, certainly as a university person. I don't want to call myself an academic because I don't think I am one. It's not what I wanted to do when I grew up. Yes. I'm also very actively involved in various efforts that the university has made against anti-Black racism. So that has also influenced the way I engage with my art and etc. So all of that just to situate myself, and I continue to have an active artistic practice as a dramaturg and a performer, and my research work is predominantly in We could call them decolonial. I'm more inclined to call them situated dramaturgies. So my theme, offered by these two wizards, is corporeal resistance. And in a way, it kind of follows on from what we're talking about, of course. So whether we hearken back to bodies on the land, the blockades, maybe even having dance in the institution is a form of corporeal resistance. It's clear that working with the body in the societies that we live in, that's eminently political, regardless of what we're doing, in fact, with those bodies, right? And so I'm interested in, just understanding what forms corporeal resistance can take, what function does it serve in the context in which we're living, navigating. Maybe just start there, and there's more that will come out of it. And I'm opening it up, to all of you, including you two, ultimately. And me too. And me too. I mean, maybe I start as well. I mean, that's also, I mean, for me, the notion of corporeal resistance in the context of dance already is, first of all, there is the act, the fact that I work with my body, with all of the policing and the different ways in which that policing happens in our society. Also, there's a kind of, the relationship to visuality in our society as well. So if I'm going to focus on a more, what I would describe as somatic approach to movement, where I'm not going to just execute the fantastic thing, I'm going to feel, Susan, you were talking about. Those for me are ways of engaging with a certain resistance, from within myself. As a maker, I think very much in, I'll just stop that. Don't need it anymore. It's my turn. No, kidding. It's good, huh? Time, just capitalizing on Andre's proposition and the algorithms. No, but I think also for me in the training of dance, for example, the idea of moving beyond and at least saying it out loud and doing it, moving beyond the formatting, moving beyond everybody in a technique class, we all learn to be the best technicians at that specific thing that we can be without it ever being addressed. And then we become ultimately vehicles for the vision of, that all of that for me is needing to be addressed in the notion of corporeal resistance. I really want to share the discussion, so.
Just something quick, André, I've been sitting with this really important point you made about the crisis being ongoing. The one thing that is always ongoing in the world is movement. There's nothing ever that's not moving. Everything here is moving, right? The only thing is what is perceptible in its movement. And so humans have a tendency to give primacy to their own movements, to our own movements, because it's hard for us to conceive of the molecular movements of things that appear as still around us. And it's true of crisis as well, right? The last people to notice the crisis of fascism were the people who benefited from fascism, the white people, obviously, right? And you listen to anybody who's lived in the ongoing crisis in the afterlives of slavery, and they just kind of look at you like, Jesus Christ, where have you been, right? And so I think that in the resistance, there's something there, because our work is to be attuned to movement, right? But sometimes we even get in the way of that. So I want to give an example of that that's not actually of today. So I think it was 2017 or so, I was invited to do a piece in Tunisia. And this felt really important. The people organizing the festival are really amazing dancers. and social justice folks who have activated the Medina in Tunis, and were doing it, you know, in the times of the uprising as well, like right after when it was against the law to gather. And so they had organized yearly, but I was part of one of the years, a yearly festival where they invited a choreographer from outside of Tunisia, at least that year, and invited people to come and do work. I was the only white person invited that year, and then except for the choreographer slash curator, who was also white from Belgium. What was taking place there was horrific in my view. There was what it felt like to me was using Black and brown bodies to make a choreographic statement on, you know, by a white choreographer, and doing a kind of weird social work as dance. So the body as resistance was now social work. So what you do is you go to Tunisia, you find the LGBTQ people, you work with these young people, and then you do a performance with them, or you find the refugees. But these people, the LGBTQ people, or the whatever those people are, they still live in Tunis after the choreographer leaves, and so you've done your little festival, but you haven't actually engaged the conditions of the important difference between what is performance and what is life. And there is an ethics there that I think, even though I'm somebody who always thinks that we're doing this work all the time, that you have to attend to. So I remember wondering how whiteness was in constellation in that moment. In my own work at that particular, in that particular environment, my body was not in my work. Usually my body is not in my work, which is not to say that I think bodies shouldn't be in work. It just happens that in my work, my body doesn't tend to be in it. But the work was large. I mean, about the size of this whole space. And it was called The Color of Time, and it was influenced by the rain. It was a textile piece. I can't tell you how many so-called foreigners, and I have to say they were white, asked where the work was. I mean, they would walk through the work and say, "Where's the work?" And there were 100 kilograms of turmeric. Like, you really couldn't miss the work, right? But they were looking for the body in resistance. And this made me think a lot about this question of corporeality. By the end of the event, all of those young, amazing dancers who'd been asked to be social workers were in total resistance. They didn't even want to do this social work anymore, because they were catching on to the role that they were being asked to play in an art market. And so the question of resistance in dance and in art feels important to me also at that level.
Corporeal resistance, I feel, as long as we understand that the resistance, as long as it is corporeal, is also part of the 3 ecologies plus 1, I would add a 4th element, if that's okay. The 3 elements are conceptual, social, and environmental. I would add the spiritual. It's very fun. It's an essential dimension, I feel. Without which it's not possible to understand how is it that communities gather, and how is it that the struggle can happen transgenerationally. I don't think, right? I wanted to say that in terms of corporeal resistance, I also feel that the collective, like the body will never be single, like reminding that individual freedom is a burden, right? Like to carry the individual as the one who can carry their own freedom, individual. That's the problem, the individual freedom, right? That's like what's mobilizing neoliberal fascism. It's my freedom of doing, and I don't care about anybody else, right? So it's like, again, like this kind of black hole, right? Out of which you don't escape into relationality, right? Like the poetics of relation, the politics of relation, right? So as long as is there more than one, then we're going to be, then that it's possible to have corporeal resistance. And here I want to invoke the 2 Brazilian choreographers, dancers that work and develop their work together, Davi Pontes and Wallace Ferreira. You can check out their work, Davi Pontes, Wallace Ferreira. They work in this kind of beautiful, almost quantic superposition as queer Black bodies. And they talk about they practice as dance as a practice of self-defense. And I'm just going to read because it's good to to quote correctly. They have a piece called repertoire, which is a piece that ends without. They're in a room in a gallery situation. The audience sits around. They're naked except with this like kind of military boots, and they go like, I've probably seen it. And it lasts as long as they feel it should last, which is it's a problem for producers and presenters because it could last like 5 minutes or 5 hours. So it's a problem for festivals. But they say with this piece, they wanted to, quote, set up an ethical political program to think about self-defense. That is, to pierce through fear and understand the unavoidable condition of not having peace as a choice. And this is, I feel, again, it's important to go back to the notion that the struggle is real, right? The struggle is real for queer people, for trans people, for people of color, for indigenous populations, for those who are being displaced. It is a war. We shouldn't try to sugarcoat it, right? However, in that struggle, the choice is still to do art and to create out of the conditions of the impossible life that one is given to, right? And this is what I feel like Susan, like, this is what dance does. It is that, right? And the other person that has been very important to think about this notion of collective for me has been Nora Chipalmire, which brings the four ecologies, I would say, right? In Harare, like working in their garden, planting, but also like creating community and always invoking the spiritual. I just wanted to say this with respect because I'm not part of the tradition. I'm not initiated, but I've been, I study as much as I can. So I do this with respect. But today they voted down that law that was going to destroy the forest. Thursday is the day of Oxóssi. Oxóssi is the Orisha of the forests. So that's one thing. The other thing about the question of the ongoing struggle, I'm going to quote from a Brazilian scholar. His name is Luis Rufino. And we're having, during COVID, in the lockdown, right? The experience of the lockdown during COVID with Bolsonaro in Brazil and Trump in the US. It's just like this genocide, right? So there was like this online meeting of every Wednesday afternoon, there's something called Open Windows. And the Open Windows was an initiative of Eleonora, my partner, who's an artist, and also her colleague at the Federal University of Rio, who's an anthropologist working in Afro-Brazilian traditions. And the Open Windows was an occasion for people to get together and to talk, just like here. And Luis Rufino was one of the people who were talking, and one of the participants in the Zoom room asked the question, we are tired, we are exhausted, right? Because the struggle exhausts us, right? So how can we continue, right? Under the conditions of, right? And he gives to me like an answer about the corporeal resistance, right? And I'm just going to read again, asking permission. It says something like, he answered like this. I'm going to translate from Portuguese. He said, well, to problematize exhaustion, no, to problematize how to rest, I'm sorry, to problematize how to rest in a society of exhaustion, which is our society, right? Exhaustion, it's very necessary. However, I do not know if Ogun, which is the Orisha of war and opening pathways, I don't know if Ogun ever rests, but I can affirm that Ogun knows how to throw a party. How to throw a party. Ogun throws parties and vagabonds. So this is what you should do, right? So I feel like it's a really beautiful way of bringing this notion of the collective, of the corporeal resistance, right?
I was just going to add that it's important when you're assessing what corporeal resistance might consist in, that you conduct a choreographic analysis of the situation and try to determine what is needed in this particular moment, because resistance can and should take so many different forms. It might mean being still, it might mean lying down, it might mean getting as heavy as you can, it might mean running in a particular direction, it might mean, walking arm in arm forward. And you have to think in each case, what is required here? What is the most effective intervention that can be made? And you do that by doing a choreographic analysis of the situation.
Yeah, it also makes me think of like the analysis that you put forward of, and I think a few weeks ago, one of the participants in the lunch counter sit-ins just died. And so, what is really interesting about the situation that these bodies are doing exactly the same movement as the bodies that they are protesting against. So, and it is about the different kind of body in that place. And so, and teaching and thinking about these historical moments that we are then choreographically analyze and put forward as possibilities that are exactly the same kind of movement as a negative movement can be, and a movement that excludes, yet it is seen as can have a different impact then. Yeah, I think I don't want to have the last word. I rather that people start maybe asking questions to our guests, if anyone, and I think there are microphones that can go into the audience if you want to do that.
And also, for anyone joining us on Zoom, if they have a question, they can pop it into the chat and we can read it out. But if anyone here has a question, just raise your hand. I'll bring microphone over. There's one. Great.
Thank you so much. And it was wonderful to hear all of what you shared today. I really appreciate it so much. When I saw the title a few weeks ago, it brought to mind something, I'm going to give a quote as well. Rob Nixon talks about slow violence, and he's referring to environmental harm and structural oppression that often unfolds gradually and almost invisibly. But while I was listening to all of you today, my mind was going in many directions, but it brought back different pathways, or it offered different pathways to me, which made me reflect upon my own evolution, really. And I went back to a time that I spent at UCLA at the Center for Intercultural Performance under the supervision of Judy Mitoma. And it really made me think about what she would talk about when she referred to dance as being a cultural mediator, a way of preserving and sharing diverse cultures while creating shared space for political conversation. And that to me was really fundamental. And the process of choreography could be about collaboration, about listening, reciprocity. And this would be like a model for more equitable social structure. Another person in our midst at that time, this is many years ago, I have to say, was Peter Sellers, the director, and he saw performance as an urgent civic intervention. And I think that he was arguing that choreography could disrupt oppressive narratives and that it could create temporary citizen assemblies. He referred to it as that. In other words, thinking about alternate futures. And I love that idea that dance could be a form of what he called ethical resistance, that a space where the body, or perhaps something else, could testify against injustice and rehearses new social relations. So all to say, I think what they were creating for me, it's more of a comment that I'm adding to what you all said, is that there's a dialogue that they offered. Mitoma, I think, framing dance as a bridge, while Sellers talked about it more as a provocation, and that choreography is absolutely not neutral. It's a site where cultural memory, power, and the possibility of transformation are physically negotiated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's made me think of a few things that I might add to that. I think of a really beautiful passage that I don't have in front of me, so I'm not going to quote it, from the Undercommons, Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, where they talk about the call to order. And you were talking about attuning to emergent choreographies. How do we do that work? And what they're saying is that, they're talking about the classroom in that part of the Undercommons, and they're saying, isn't it odd that as teachers, we go into a space to stop what's happening in order to start what's happening? And any of us who've ever taken a dance class have had to stop moving in order to start moving. And it's incredibly hard not to do a call to order. Anybody who's studied with me knows that I've tried. And you just sit there and you wither, and you're like, oh my God, are we going to do this class? Am I, and so then you apologize for doing a call to order. But it's interesting just to be aware of how attuning to the choreographies involves also attuning to what's already happening. That was one of the things and then the other thing I've been thinking about as you spoke and other people spoke, and the question of the human. So my collaborators often don't have movement easily. Or another way of putting it is that the call to order doesn't work very well for them. These are folks often who are autistic, whose movements can move into catatonia, which is kind of a hyperactive body that looks still like a Parkinsonian body, is also a hyperactive body that has sort of stilled in its tremor. And the only way to activate a body is to be in the attunement to what Adam Wolfen calls relational pacing. And relational pacing means being willing to give up that call to order. You could take half an hour. Sometimes it takes Adam, who's the first so-called non-speaking autistic in Canada, to get an MA. He graduated this year. It sometimes can take Adam half a day to get out of bed, right? And so when we say movement, I'm often thinking about this kind of primacy of displacement as movement, but the choreographies of intensity are also what I think we're talking about. And sometimes they move in ways that we don't know they're moving. And so I just want to throw that out there.
Hi. I have a question about the last thing, André, you brought up about he knows how to party. And it's been a 2-year-long research I'm doing about partying as a political tool. And I would love to ask you how each one of you party in your own practice.
I think if I say it, it's not going to be fun. So, we party with music and, friends and whatever. Throws a good party. I don't know how to answer that question. You already know.
I used to party. But it's true. I mean, if I think about the 90s and the 2000s, actually there was indeed a lot of it happened in the party, in the gathering with others, in the music, in the collective ground. So, and this was very informative, as also in a way as a rebellious place, or a place maybe an anonymous place as well, a place of the crowd, a place of collective joy, but a place where you can quickly go away as well. So a kind of an indeterminate area, also with lots of difference, no, like different peoples, different ways of moving. So in a way, it was part of the school, or part of the training was clubbing. Yeah. So I mean, now I can't do it anymore, but I still think it's important.
I would just add something really quickly. So there's an artist in Montreal who you might know. His name is Raphael Lozano-Hemmer. I'm sure you know his work. Nobody knows how to party like Raphael. And what's the interesting thing about Raphael is that he's never separated his work from the parties he creates. And so I wonder too, and I'm serious, like he'll do an enormous show in Japan, but he'll spend as much attention on the party he's going to create. I'm not good at partying, But I think that what you were saying about parties is really about the openness to the conviviality. It doesn't have to be human to human, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I just wanted then to now, going back to the question of intensity as opposed to displacement, because there's an image, there's a cliche of what a party should look like. And if it doesn't look like that way, then it's not a good party. But actually, maybe it's my excuse because, again, I'm a bad dancer. So maybe it's okay just to chill, and that's an amazing party already. But this question of intensity, I think it's interesting, right? And to think away from what we think a party should look like, especially especially in Brazil, in which the industry of a certain kind of exoticization, self-exoticization through the constant display of happiness and joy is complex through, I'm talking industry and all of that, carnival industry. Yeah.
Maybe there's very different part. I mean, so
Yeah.
we cannot just say that.
No, yeah. So the second part is, so Ogum knows how to throw a party and to vagabond. So that's important.
I party 5 mornings a week on the fire road that takes me up the coastal chaparral and overlooking Los Angeles. I party with rocks and coyotes and hawks and all varieties of cactus and snakes and dung beetles, and we have a rollicking good time.
And then we do have some questions online, I believe.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been really incredible. Thank you for coming all this way and teaching us all the time. I'm wondering about insight into our capacity to move more tremendously on the left, while also being able to call ourselves out and call others out for nihilistic tendencies in hiding. You're saying they're there. I remember Jan saying the other day how it's really hard to tell. Indoctrination and resistance are not clear to see, or we would know when it's happening. But I feel like this is something that we have a difficult time with on the left, is like moving forwards together, because there's always so much fragmentation within it. Because if you don't say the right thing, if you're not from the city and you don't have the right language, then you can't be part of the party. But how can we still be acute? And I think it is mostly within ourselves to be able to notice the hardness or something that's leaning towards like violence, but then also move quickly, like the slowness of healing and the speed that we need in order to combat something that's moving so fast.
It's all of our question. That's why we're being quiet. But the interesting thing about movement is it doesn't build a self. A self is just a shorthand for one of the ways in which we call it to stop. And so I think that we're really practiced, unfortunately, at all the stops. It takes a lot of courage to be in that movement. One of the things I learned this summer watching the Hereditary Chiefs, and it's something I've been thinking about the whole time, that their movements, especially Robert Echaquan, who's the one I got to know best, his movements are slow. You know, most of the time at the blockades, people are just eating and sitting around a fire. Like there wasn't much talking. It seemed always to me like there was a lot of observing. And one of the questions that was coming up again and again and again was, is it safe to blockade? This was really strong for me because he wanted to know whose bodies were on the line. These are wild spaces. these routes that go up north with the lumber trucks. Like you could be killed on one of those places really easily. People have guns in their cars. They have these lumber trucks carry forests in the back, you know, but it never felt like decisions were being made unilaterally. And so, and like I said before, it wasn't an environment of debate. There was no calling out ever. There was a lot of humor about the city folks not knowing how to move in the forest, a lot of humor, but lovely humor, you know? So sometimes I think that our arcs are too short, you know, to come back to what André was saying, our arcs are too short. So I'm impatient with you because you're not where I want you to be right now. But the folks who have longer arcs, maybe they've also learned through those longer arcs that it's just going to take a different kind of time.
And that those different kinds of times coexist, cohabit.
And to repurpose, also coming from your question, to repurpose the difference without separability essay by Denise Ferreira da Silva, maybe like the left also needs to know that the micro differences in approaches do not necessarily need to create separability and antagonism, right? So maybe it's another way of thinking about that.
We got one in the back.
Hi. So I was just wondering if any of you guys have any thoughts or insight about the current state of the kind of collective dance party scene that I see going on. I find it's going in a very weird direction, kind of away from like the importance of like collective movement and the community building aspects that can come from a culture of like strong dancing and partying together. Clubbing is getting very weird. Raves have become quite a weird spectacle. And I don't know, I would like to see a more authentic culture come out from the world. And I was just wondering if you guys maybe had any insight on maybe how to bring authenticity and like the ideologies of like, yeah, dance and community and connection being like the forefront of this culture. Like if you have any kind of insight on how, I don't know, that might get better. Sorry. We look like we go clubbing. Oh, I would love to hear that.
Yeah, we just like destroy the club by entering it. So it's like, I don't know.
Maybe.
Can we take an answer from the? Yes, sure. Of course we can.
I think it can. I think part of the answer connects to something that Susan was saying, which is the phones, the rugs, the rocks. Yeah, the rocks, and the phones. I mean, it's just because we're in a deeply disconnected situation, right? Where everybody is so deeply self-conscious, and it's the complete antithesis to the ethics of partying. So, like, I don't know. It's like somehow like partying has to like reconnect to like. No, I was gonna say something bad, but yeah, do you know what I mean? It's like somehow it has to like get religious again.
Thank you. There's also a question on Zoom, which I'd like to read out, unless Carolina would like to pop on your mic and read it out for you, but for space, we'll read it. Carolina says, it's a question for André. It says, greetings from a Brazilian body moving through Boston. Thank you to the speakers and the host of this session. My question for André, how do you feel are possible ways to intertwine and strategize the luta with the party without making it vague for show or as entertainment, and while embracing our different positionalities and communicative gestures?
I think the last person who spoke just gave the answer. It's the same. That's the answer. Okay. Yeah.
There we go. Take another question here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. Sorry. So I'm going to ramble a little bit as I try to find language for this question because I just feel very activated right now and my brain is going into many different directions and I'm a very nonlinear person and I feel lots of things are happening metabolically, conceptually in my body right now. It's exciting. So I think I have a question about meaning making and the role of dance in meaning making, specifically because this thing with the phones and the connection, we're kind of in a moment where the speed of meaning and new meaning is happening very quickly, and it's also happening very far apart. And so I'm curious about dance as a tool of meaning making and shared meaning making in such that it has the capacity to hold many meanings at once, and yet we can still share that together. And how does that maybe contend with the speed of meaning that is happening through fascism and online and in very different other spaces? Yeah, I don't know, this is a rambling question, but something along the lines of, I have a hunch it has something to do with time and with friendship and with speed and all of that, but yeah, really dance is a meaning making tool I'm curious about.
Thank you for taking that risk. I'm just going to get them started, then they're going to have really brilliant things to say. I think often we are in that call to order, like we're dancing all the time. And the problem is perhaps identifying the beginnings in the wrong places. Like you're probably way more interesting before you entered the club than after you entered the club, right? Or just on your way to the university and not in the classroom. The other day, I went to get my bike after I was teaching, and somebody had locked their bike to my bike. I was so pissed off. So I went inside. I don't have paper in my purse. I don't have pencils anymore. I found somebody and I wrote, "What the fuck?" and put my phone number and put it on their handlebar and went and took the subway. I was so pissed off. And then at the end of the day, the person called me and said, "Listen, I'm so sorry. I put my bike, I locked your bike because you forgot to lock it." And, that's also a dance. I mean, it's a dance in the sense of thinking, God, it's been a hard month and I didn't lock my bike. And this really nice person locked the bike and I was really mad at him. And so my tendency is could we zoom out a bit and begin to become more interested in all those interstitial, emergent environments for movement, those kinds of choreographic attunements that we're training for, because that's what we're doing. Like, as I think, I can't remember who said it before, we're moving everywhere. We're always moving, where it's not just in dance classes that we're moving, but what we're doing in dance, and hopefully in other places too, is learning to notice. And in that noticing, we're also perhaps noticing different kinds of rhythms. The last thing I want to say is, so at 3E, we have a big garden, and it's really, really hard to garden in zone 3B, which happens to be the zone of 3E. I know it has nothing to do with it. Zone 3B is 90 days. 90 days is very, very short for a garden. Most crops need 120 days to fruit. And so, and I grew up, on a farm. I know how to garden, but gardening in that zone has proven to be very difficult. And this summer, it got around in the forest, because the garden is in the middle of the forest, that we had a great restaurant. And so the deer and the raccoons and the groundhogs and the chipmunks were really enjoying themselves. And every time they would eat the garden, I would think that was the last time they would eat the garden. It took me a really long time to understand that there was no limit to their choreography of satiation. They really taught me how to move with them. And it was often really frustrating. I'd been growing these things since March 1st inside, but I did enjoy learning it. And a lot of the time when I'm up there, I have a kind of superego of the university in my head telling me I'm not doing the proper kind of work, because I'm not doing an exhibition or I'm not doing a performance. And I want to talk back to the university. I'm learning something, I learned something really important today. I did dance today, And so that conversation, to make it a little bit more a kind of collective conversation, might also be good for our souls.
I think the idea of meaning making as well is also about again just shifting the situatedness again of what is meaning, like what does that mean, and is that really about an individual at all? We only exist here in the context of each other and the grounds we stand on, and so I think it takes us back again to this idea of the collective that you were talking about, and that I mean, yeah, every now and again, you can put on music and dance alone in your room, but ultimately the dancing has always been with others. It has always been with others. That is our first language, Bonnie Bainbridge says. It's movement, it's dancing. And so there's something about the notion of meaning being seen beyond what does it mean to me? And in fact, what does it mean relationally? Because that, I think, immediately shifts the parameters,
And yeah, like to continue, I think it's really a place for gathering. So there is something about coming together, and what we rehearse in this coming together, and this as a form of sociability and the form of understanding relationality that eventually might be useful for outside of the situation itself. In a way, it's also like, I think it's a place of rescuing something, rescuing maybe some humanity, rescuing some values and putting them into practice and see. I was thinking also before, like as a place of, because language seems to be like so true, and then maybe movement might be more ambiguous, and maybe there's many things that can be. I was thinking about censorship actually, and it's like you can still speak with your body. You can still speak beyond word. Yeah, I don't know, and and maybe there's meaning making without word also, and yeah, I don't know if this helps.
I was hoping that Susan would say something about meaning making and dance, but I'll just say something very quickly, because that makes me think immediately about dance dramaturgy, which supposedly should be about meaning, but for me it's a very complicated word, meaning, and I don't know if it's meaning making, but if we displace the question, it would be about what is the doing that dance does by making itself as it dances, right? So it's about effects and affects more than meanings to me, because I have a difficult relationship with that word. I don't know what it means, so.
I'm all for dance making meaning. I mean, I think it's really fantastic that dances can make meaning, and that they can be confusing, and that they can mean different things at the same time. And they can be, polyvalent in their meaning. And that's a terrific capacity that the body has to generate those different ways of being meaningful.
I'm just looking at time, and we still have the space available, so we can continue this conversation in different levels. But
Doris Humphrey said, all dances are too long.
Might we just take one more on Zoom, maybe?
Can you read it out from there, Angélique? I can do it. I certainly can. I'll do it. You got it? Okay. The question is, what is a step forward to eliminating judging others and really getting lost in a respectable space? And then they expand, where everyone, male and female, and everyone in between can just be together without feeling the need to overstep boundaries or to commit something that doesn't serve any good. They mentioned, I feel right now in this time and age that there are so many precautions around places that we go, watching for your drinks, watching out for other people. No wonder we cannot enjoy things like people once did. The question being, what is a step forward to eliminating judging others and getting lost in a respectable space?
So I've been looking at this question for a few minutes. There's no magic time when it was all easy, I'm afraid. But I think your question is really, really important. There's a lot of pain in the world, and there's a lot of fear of getting it wrong, and there's a lot of self-consciousness. And as soon as there's self-consciousness, what you know for sure is there's no movement. Because we've stopped again at the self, right? And so I think that it is a question that is pedagogical, like in the widest sense. How do we teach each other again to be attuned and as in the way that Angélique was telling us, to be open to the interstitial movements, to not identify certain ways of moving as having more value than other ways of moving. One of the things I think a lot in the classroom is that we've been trained, most of us, by the time we get to university for at least 13 years, if not longer, to be able to quickly identify what has value and what doesn't. And the first encounters with students in a room are always to solidify that question. How exactly are you going to give me value or take away my value? And we give each other the opportunity to do that. And I'm not saying it's not real. It is real. As a professor, I have that power. But if we don't do that, if we actively refuse to be in that game of valuation, and instead, if we really attend to movement and ask ourselves how it is that we come together in the convivialities of those movements, then we begin to go back to this question of the lutte, of the struggle, and we remind each other that we've come actually out of a desire to learn together. We've come in a desire to party together. We've come in a desire to dance together. And there we can begin to be awake to what is emerging in that environment, not to what is presupposed to have value in that environment.
I just wanted to quote Doris Humphrey, we don't have to stop.
You want to say something about I was thinking that maybe the question also opens up at least the possibility of quote Deleuze talking with Toni Negri, and when he talks about the difference between disciplinary societies and control societies. And then there's a moment that it says we're going to miss the disciplinary societies, and we are right here in the control society. And it seems to me that the question of the control society is also that the self, the selfie, and self-consciousness, and the entrepreneurial high-performance individual of self-control and self-possession will prevent for collective joy, right? So that's one of the ways of thinking about that question, you know. Yeah.
As I said before, the space is open. I wanted to thank, or we want to thank, all three of you for coming here, having this conversation with each other and with us and with the room. Thank you so much.
You threw a hell of a party, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jens. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thanks for coming in. Thank you for all your questions. Just let you know, we're closing up the Zoom right now. We've recorded this to a private channel, but we're going to talk to everyone afterwards and see if this is something we want to release on our YouTube channel. So hopefully there'll be a version, and then you can find it there. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.